The morning Emily Carter walked into the Wright mansion as a humble maid, she had no idea she was about to steal the heart of a millionaire and destroy his family's carefully laid plans forever. When Malcolm Wright shocked everyone by choosing the quiet woman nobody respected over the elegant socialite they'd picked for him, it set off a chain reaction that would tear through generations of wealth and power. But what Emily didn't know was that his father had already set a trap that would force her to choose between love and her dreams. A choice that would either make her the most hated woman in high society or prove that sometimes the heart knows what money can't buy. As the Wright family prepared for the dinner party that would change everything, Emily stood at the crossroads between the life she'd always known and the love she'd never dared to imagine. If you're watching this story unfold, hit that subscribe button and tell me what city you're watching from. I love connecting with viewers from around the world. The morning sun cast long shadows across the Wright estate's perfectly manicured lawns. Emily Carter moved quietly through the grand foyer, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper against the marble floors. At 27, she had learned to make herself invisible in places like this, places where her presence was necessary but not welcomed. She carried fresh linens toward the East Wing, where the family would gather for their weekend retreat. The Wright mansion sprawled across 15 acres of pristine countryside, each room more elegant than the last. Emily had worked here for 8 months, long enough to know every corner, every routine, every way to stay out of sight. "Emily, dear." Mrs. Alvarez appeared at the top of the curved staircase, her graying hair pulled back in its usual neat bun. The head housekeeper had kind eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. "The guest rooms are ready?" "Yes, ma'am. Fresh flowers in each one, just like Mrs. Wright requested." Emily's voice was soft but clear. She had learned to speak when spoken to, nothing more. Mrs. Alvarez nodded approvingly. "Good girl. The family should start arriving around noon. Stay close to the kitchen today. Mrs. Wright will want everything perfect." Emily understood. Weekend gatherings meant extra scrutiny, extra pressure to be flawless and unseen. She had mastered both. The kitchen buzzed with controlled chaos as the chef and his assistants prepared for the weekend. Emily slipped in quietly, checking her list of tasks, polish the silver, arrange fresh flowers, make sure every surface gleamed. She moved with practiced efficiency, her hands steady as she worked. Through the kitchen window, she watched groundskeepers trimming hedges with mathematical precision. Everything at the Wright estate had its place, its purpose, even her. "That boy's coming home early again." Mrs. Alvarez shook her head as she hung up the phone. "Malcolm just called. He'll be here within the hour." Emily's hands paused on the crystal glass she was polishing. Malcolm Wright was the family's youngest son, though at 30 he was hardly a boy. She had seen him only a handful of times during his brief visits. Unlike his parents, he actually looked at the staff when he spoke to them. It was unsettling in a way that kindness from unexpected places always was. "Best get the main guest room ready too, then," Mrs. Alvarez continued. "He wasn't supposed to arrive until evening." Emily nodded and finished with the glassware. She had learned not to ask questions about the family's comings and goings. Their lives were not her concern beyond making sure their comfort was attended to. The sound of gravel crunching under tires drew her attention back to the window. A sleek black car wound up the circular drive, too early to be any of the expected guests. Emily watched as it came to a stop near the main entrance. Malcolm Wright stepped out, stretching his tall frame after what must have been a long drive. Even from a distance, Emily could see the way he carried himself, confident but not arrogant, aware of his place in the world but not harsh about it. He wore simple clothes, dark jeans and a white button-down shirt that looked expensive without trying too hard. He said something to James, the groundskeeper, and actually waited for an answer. Most of the family treated the staff like moving furniture. Malcolm seemed to see them as people. "I'll go greet Mr. Malcolm," Mrs. Alvarez said, smoothing her apron. "You finish up here and then start on the dining room." Emily nodded and turned back to her work. She had silver to polish and arrangements to perfect. The family would expect nothing less. An hour later, she was adjusting white roses in the main hallway when she heard footsteps on the marble floor. She looked up to find Malcolm Wright standing at the foot of the grand staircase, apparently taking in his childhood home after time away. "Beautiful arrangement," he said, and Emily realized he was speaking to her. "Thank you, sir." She kept her voice respectful and quiet. He moved closer, studying the flowers with genuine interest. Roses from the estate garden? Yes, sir. Your mother prefers them to store-bought. Emily wasn't sure why she added that detail, but something about his easy manner invited conversation. She's always had strong opinions about authenticity. Malcolm's tone carried the warmth of fond memory rather than criticism. I'm Malcolm, by the way. I don't think we've been properly introduced. Emily's hands stilled on the rose stems. Family members didn't introduce themselves to the help. Emily Carter, sir. I work housekeeping. Nice to meet you, Emily. He extended his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she shook it. His grip was firm but gentle, and he didn't seem in a hurry to let go. How long have you been with the family? 8 months now. She couldn't hide her surprise at his continued attention. Do you like it here? The question caught her off guard. No one had ever asked her that. It's a good job, sir. Something flickered in his dark eyes, understanding perhaps of all the things she hadn't said. I'm glad to hear that. The sound of car doors slamming outside announced the arrival of more family members. Malcolm glanced toward the front door, then back at Emily. I should let you get back to your work, he said. But Emily, you don't have to call me, sir. Malcolm is fine. She watched him walk away, his words echoing in her mind. In 8 months of working at the Wright estate, no one had ever told her to use their first name. She wasn't sure what to make of it. The weekend officially began with the arrival of Richard and Helen Wright, Malcolm's parents. Emily watched from the upstairs landing as they swept through the front door with the kind of presence that commanded attention. Richard was distinguished in his perfectly tailored suit, every silver hair in place. Helen moved with practiced elegance, her designer dress and jewelry chosen to project exactly the right image. Malcolm, darling. Helen's voice carried the refined tone of someone who had never doubted their place in the world. You're early. Finished my meetings sooner than expected. Malcolm hugged his mother, then shook his father's hand. Thought I'd enjoy some quiet time before the circus begins, Richard chuckled. Your cousin Daniel will be here soon, and the Petersons are driving up from the city, hardly quiet. Speaking of quiet, Helen's gaze swept the foyer critically. I hope everything is ready. We can't have any oversights with the Peterson family here. Emily shrank back against the wall, though she was already practically invisible on the landing above. Helen Wright had never spoken directly to her, but her standards were legendary among the staff. Everything looks perfect, Mother, Malcolm said, and there was something in his tone that made Emily look down at him. He was scanning the foyer appreciatively, the gleaming floors, the fresh flowers, the carefully arranged furniture. The staff has outdone themselves. Helen nodded absently, already moving toward the sitting room. I should check on dinner preparations. Richard, pour yourself a drink. We have a long weekend ahead. As his parents disappeared into the house, Malcolm remained in the foyer. He looked up directly at Emily, where she stood on the landing. Thank you, he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. For the perfect welcome home. Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks. She nodded once and hurried away, her heart beating faster than it should have been. It was just politeness, she told herself. Rich people were taught to be gracious. It didn't mean anything. But as she prepared for the formal dinner that evening, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her, really looked at her like she was someone worth seeing. The dining room gleamed under crystal chandeliers as Emily made final adjustments to the place settings. Each piece of silverware was precisely positioned, each wineglass polished to perfection. She had learned to create beauty for others, to enjoy while remaining invisible herself. Voices drifted from the sitting room where the family gathered for cocktails before dinner. Emily recognized Malcolm's warm laugh, his father's measured tones, his mother's careful conversation. Soon she would need to help serve, to move silently between the chairs while they ate and talked, as if she weren't there. Emily, Mrs. Alvarez appeared in the doorway. Mrs. Wright wants you to assist with service tonight. Stay close to the dining room in case anything is needed. Emily nodded. She had served at formal dinners before, though usually she worked behind the scenes. Tonight would require extra care to remain unnoticed. The family entered the dining room with their guests, Daniel Wright, Malcolm's cousin, and the Peterson family Helen had mentioned. Emily positioned herself near the sideboard, ready to respond to any need. "This roast is exceptional," Mrs. Peterson commented, and Helen accepted the compliment gracefully. "Our chef is quite talented. We've been fortunate to keep him for several years now." Emily served wine and cleared plates, moving with practiced efficiency. She had learned to anticipate needs before they were voiced, to be present without being intrusive. "Malcolm, your mother tells me you've been traveling extensively for work," Mr. Peterson said. "How do you find the time to maintain relationships?" Malcolm paused with his fork halfway to his mouth. "I make time for what matters, sir." "Spoken like a bachelor," Daniel laughed. "Easy to say when you don't have to check with anyone before booking the next flight." "Perhaps it's time to settle down," Helen said with the careful tone of someone broaching a delicate subject. "Nina Brooks was asking about you just last week." Emily's hands stilled as she refilled water glasses. Nina Brooks was beautiful, educated, and came from the right kind of family. Everyone said she and Malcolm would make a perfect match. "Nina is a lovely woman," Malcolm said diplomatically, "but I'm not looking to settle for perfect on paper." "What are you looking for, then?" his father asked. Malcolm was quiet for a moment, his gaze moving around the table. "Something real. Someone who sees me as more than my bank account or my last name." His eyes met Emily's across the room, just for an instant, but long enough for her to feel the weight of his attention. She looked away quickly, focusing on her duties. "Reality can be overrated," Mr. Peterson chuckled. "My Martha and I had a perfectly practical arrangement. Love grew from respect and shared goals." "Nothing wrong with practical," Helen agreed. "Passion fades, character and compatibility last." "But what if you can have both?" Malcolm asked. "What if you find someone who challenges you and calms you at the same time? Someone genuine?" Emily felt her cheeks warm as she served dessert. She shouldn't be listening to this conversation, shouldn't be wondering why Malcolm's words made her pulse quicken. "You're an idealist," Daniel said fondly. "But be careful. The genuine ones are usually hiding something, or they're after something they can't get on their own." "That's rather cynical," Malcolm replied. "That's rather realistic," Helen corrected gently. "People in our position must be cautious about motives." Emily finished serving and stepped back toward the sideboard. The family continued their conversation, but she found herself watching Malcolm as he listened to their advice. He seemed thoughtful rather than convinced, as if he were measuring their words against his own experiences. When dinner ended and the family moved to the library for coffee, Emily began clearing the table. She worked quickly, wanting to finish before they returned. "You can slow down," Malcolm's voice came from the doorway. "They'll be talking politics for another hour at least." Emily looked up, surprised. The dining room suddenly felt smaller with just the two of them in it. "I don't want to keep anyone waiting," she said, continuing to stack plates carefully. "You heard our dinner conversation." It wasn't a question. Emily's hands paused. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to listen. I was just doing your job, I know." Malcolm stepped into the room, closing the distance between them. "What did you think of their advice?" She stared at him, confused. "Sir?" "Malcolm," he corrected gently. "And I'm asking what you thought about settling for practical versus holding out for real." Emily set down the plates she was holding. This conversation felt dangerous in ways she couldn't name. I think most people don't get to choose. They take what they can get and make the best of it." "And what about you? What would you choose?" The question hung in the air between them. Emily thought about her small apartment, her carefully saved money, her quiet life of serving others. She thought about the men she had dated who saw her job as temporary, who waited for her to want something more ambitious, who never understood that she found dignity in honest work well done. "I'd choose someone who saw me," she said quietly. "Really saw me. Not who they thought I should be or who I might become. Just me." Malcolm nodded slowly. "That's what I thought you'd say." "Why did you ask?" "Because you're the first person I've talked to in a long time who didn't have an agenda, who wasn't trying to impress me or get something from me." He picked up a water glass she had missed, handing it to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it. "It's refreshing." Emily felt her heart start to race. "I should finish cleaning up." "Of course." But he didn't move away. "Emily? That conversation at dinner about being cautious of motives? Yes? Sometimes the people warning you about others are the ones with motives of their own." She looked up at him, trying to understand what he was telling her. "I should rejoin my family," he said, "but I hope we can talk again. Really, talk. Emily watched him leave, her mind spinning. She finished clearing the table in a daze, Malcolm's words echoing in her thoughts. She wasn't naive. She knew the difference between their worlds, understood why his family's warnings made sense. But she also couldn't ignore the way he looked at her, like she was someone worth knowing. That night, as she prepared for bed in her small room above the garage, Emily caught her reflection in the mirror. She saw a woman who had learned to make herself small, to expect little, to find satisfaction in work well done. For the first time in months, she wondered what Malcolm Wright saw when he looked at her. The answer scared and thrilled her in equal measure. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made everything feel possible. Emily woke before dawn, as she always did, and prepared for another day of serving the Wright family. But something felt different. The memory of Malcolm's attention, his questions, lingered in her mind like a song she couldn't stop humming. She dressed carefully in her usual uniform, a simple black dress with a white apron, and made her way to the main house. The kitchen was already alive with breakfast preparations, the scent of fresh coffee and baking bread filling the air. "You're early today," Mrs. Alvarez observed, looking up from her clipboard of daily tasks. "Couldn't sleep," Emily admitted, tying her apron strings. "Weekend gatherings will do that. Too much excitement." Mrs. Alvarez studied Emily's face with knowing eyes. "Everything all right, dear?" Emily nodded quickly. "Just want to make sure everything goes smoothly." She spent the morning attending to her usual duties, dusting furniture, arranging fresh flowers, making sure every surface in the main room sparkled. But her mind kept drifting to her conversation with Malcolm the night before. The way he had really listened to her answers, the way he had looked at her like her thoughts mattered. Around mid-morning, she was polishing silver in the formal dining room when she heard voices from the terrace outside. Through the French doors, she could see Malcolm walking with his father across the estate grounds. Their conversation looked serious, Richard gesturing emphatically while Malcolm listened with his hands in his pockets. "The Peterson contract could set us up for the next 5 years," Richard was saying as they passed close to the window, "but it requires the right kind of stability, the right kind of image. I understand the business implications, Dad. I'm just not ready to make personal decisions based on contracts." Their voices faded as they walked away, but Emily felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. She understood now why Helen had mentioned Nina Brooks at dinner. This wasn't just about Malcolm finding someone to love. It was about finding someone who fit the family's business needs. She tried to focus on her work, but the silver candlesticks seemed to blur before her eyes. She was being ridiculous. One kind conversation didn't mean anything. Malcolm Wright lived in a world of business deals and social expectations. She lived in a world of cleaning supplies and careful budgets. Whatever she had imagined between them was just her own foolish dreaming. "Emily?" The sound of her name made her look up. Malcolm stood in the doorway, no longer in his formal clothes from the walk with his father. He had changed into jeans and a soft blue sweater that made his dark eyes even warmer. "Mr. Malcolm." She set down the candlestick she was polishing. "Can I get you something?" "Actually, I was wondering if you might have a few minutes to talk, away from the house." Emily's heart jumped, but she kept her voice steady. "I have duties to attend to, sir." "Malcolm," he corrected again, stepping into the room. "And I already spoke with Mrs. Alvarez. She said you could take a short break." Emily stared at him. He had asked Mrs. Alvarez permission for her to take a break? The idea was so foreign she wasn't sure how to respond. I suppose I could spare a few minutes." "Good." His smile was genuine and warm. "Would you mind showing me the gardens? It's been a while since I really looked at them." They walked out through the French doors onto the stone terrace. The Wright estate gardens were spectacular in autumn, with maple trees showing off their red and gold leaves. Carefully maintained paths wound between flower beds and ornamental shrubs. Emily had always found peace here during her rare moments of free time. "It's beautiful," Malcolm said as they strolled down a gravel path. "I forget sometimes, living in the city, how quiet it can be." "I love the gardens," Emily said softly, "especially early in the morning before everyone else is awake. It feels peaceful." "You come out here often?" "Sometimes, before my shift starts or during breaks." She felt heat in her cheeks. "I hope that's all right." "I don't disturb anything." Of course it's all right. This is your home too, while you're working here. Malcolm stopped walking and turned to face her. Emily, can I ask you something? She nodded, not trusting her voice. Are you happy here? Really happy? The question caught her off guard, just like the night before. Why do you ask? Because you seem like someone who deserves to be happy, and I get the sense that you don't ask for much for yourself. Emily looked down at the gravel path. I'm grateful for the work. Your family has been fair to me. Fair. Malcolm repeated the word like it left a bad taste in his mouth. That's a low bar. It's more than some people get. Maybe, but it's not enough for someone like you. Emily looked up at him sharply. Someone like me. Someone kind. Someone who takes pride in their work. Someone who sees beauty in things other people take for granted. Malcolm's voice was gentle but certain. Someone genuine. The word hung between them, loaded with meaning from their conversation the night before. Emily felt her pulse quicken. You don't know me, she said quietly. I'd like to, if you'd let me. Emily stared at him, searching his face for signs that this was some kind of game, but his dark eyes were serious, patient, waiting for her answer without pressure. Why, she whispered, because in 2 conversations you've been more real with me than most people manage in months, because you see roses in a hallway and peace in a garden, because you work hard without complaining and you answer honestly when someone asks what you think. Malcolm stepped closer, his voice dropping. Because when you look at me, I don't see dollar signs or social climbing. I see someone who might actually like me for who I am, not what I can provide. Emily's breath caught. Malcolm, you don't have to say anything right now, he said quickly. I'm not asking for promises or decisions. I'm just asking if you'd be willing to spend some time with me. Real time, where we can talk without you worrying about serving dinner or me worrying about family expectations. Emily thought about Richard Wright's words on the terrace, about business deals and the right kind of image. She thought about Nina Brooks and Helen's careful hints about settling down. She thought about the vast difference between their worlds, but she also thought about the way Malcolm looked at her like she mattered, the way he had asked about her happiness, her thoughts, her dreams, the way he seemed to see something in her that she had almost forgotten was there. I'd like that, she said softly. Malcolm's face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire expression. Really? Really? But Malcolm, Emily hesitated, then forced herself to continue. Your family wouldn't understand. The other staff would talk. It could cause problems. Let me worry about that, Malcolm said firmly. You shouldn't have to make yourself smaller to make other people comfortable. Emily felt something shift inside her chest, like a door opening after being locked for too long. Okay. Malcolm's smile gentled. Would you be free this evening, after dinner service? There's a little cafe in town that stays open late. Nothing fancy, just a place where we could talk. I'd like that very much. They walked back toward the house in comfortable silence, Emily's mind racing with the enormity of what had just happened. Malcolm Wright, wealthy, educated, kind Malcolm Wright, wanted to spend time with her, not because he needed something served or cleaned or arranged, but because he enjoyed her company. It felt too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But for the first time in longer than she could remember, Emily decided to hope anyway. As they reached the terrace, Malcolm turned to her one more time. Emily? Thank you. For what? For saying yes. For being brave enough to let someone see you. Emily watched him walk back into the house, his words echoing in her mind. Being brave enough to let someone see her. She had been invisible for so long, she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be truly seen. The rest of the day passed in a blur of preparations and service. Emily moved through her duties with unusual energy, Mrs. Alvarez commenting more than once on her bright mood. When evening finally arrived and dinner service began, Emily found herself stealing glances at Malcolm across the dining room. He was the perfect host, engaging his family's guests in conversation, laughing at his cousin Daniel's jokes, listening attentively to his parents' discussions of business and society. But sometimes, when he thought no one was looking, his eyes would find Emily across the room. Each time their gazes met, Emily felt that same flutter of possibility in her chest. "You seem distracted tonight," Mrs. Alvarez observed as they cleared the final course. "Just tired," Emily said, but she couldn't hide her smile. Mrs. Alvarez studied her with shrewd eyes. Well, whatever it is, it suits you. Haven't seen you smile like this since you started working here." As the evening wound down and the guests retired to the library for coffee and conversation, Emily finished her duties with unusual speed. She changed out of her uniform into a simple blue dress, one of only 3 nice dresses she owned, and tried to calm her racing heart. Malcolm was waiting by his car when she slipped out the staff entrance. He had changed too, trading his formal dinner clothes for dark jeans and a gray sweater. He looked relaxed, approachable, and when he saw her, his face lit up with that same warm smile. "You look beautiful," he said simply, and Emily felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Thank you." He opened the passenger door for her, waiting until she was settled before walking around to the driver's side. The car was nice, expensive but not flashy, and it smelled like leather and something that was distinctly Malcolm. "Nervous?" he asked as they drove down the estate's long driveway. "A little," Emily admitted. "Me too." She looked at him in surprise. "You are?" "Terrified," Malcolm said with a laugh. "It's been a long time since I cared whether someone enjoyed spending time with me." The cafe was small and cozy, with worn wooden tables and mismatched chairs that somehow made everything feel more intimate. Only a few other customers occupied the space, and soft jazz music played in the background. Emily relaxed as soon as they walked in. "This is perfect," she said, sliding into a booth near the back. "I hoped you'd like it. I used to come here sometimes when I was younger, when I wanted to get away from the estate." Malcolm sat across from her, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug. "Tell me about yourself, Emily. The real stuff, not just where you work." Emily stirred cream into her coffee, thinking. "There's not much to tell. I grew up in a small town about an hour from here. My parents owned a diner. Nothing fancy, but they were proud of it." "Were. They died in a car accident 3 years ago." Emily's voice was steady, but Malcolm saw the pain that flickered across her face. "I was working as a waitress then, trying to save money for community college. After the funeral, I realized I needed a change. A friend told me about the position at your family's estate." "I'm sorry about your parents." "Thank you. They were good people, hardworking, honest. They taught me that there's dignity in any job done well." Emily met his eyes. "Not everyone sees it that way." "Their loss," Malcolm said firmly. "What were you planning to study in college?" "Business management, maybe. I thought about opening my own catering company someday. I like organizing events, making sure everything runs smoothly." Emily smiled at the memory. "Probably sounds small to someone like you." "It sounds like you know what you want and you're willing to work for it. That's not small at all." Malcolm leaned forward. "What's stopping you now?" Emily shrugged. "Money mostly, and time. College classes don't fit well with live-in work." "What if they did? What if you could find a way to make both work?" Emily studied his face. "Why do you care?" "Because you should have the chance to build whatever life you want. Because you're smart and capable, and you deserve more than just surviving." Malcolm reached across the table, covering her hand with his. "Because I can see how much more there is to you than what you've been allowed to show." Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. "You don't know me well enough to say that." "Then let me get to know you better." They talked until the cafe closed, sharing stories and dreams and quiet laughter. Malcolm told her about growing up with the pressure of family expectations, about feeling like his worth was measured by business success rather than personal happiness. Emily told him about her parents' diner, about the regular customers who became like family, about learning to find joy in small moments. "You make it sound easy," Malcolm said as they walked back to his car. "Finding happiness in simple things." "It's not easy," Emily corrected. "It's a choice. Every day you can choose to see problems or possibilities, pain or beauty, what you don't have or what you do." Malcolm stopped walking. "How did you get so wise?" Emily laughed. "I'm not wise. I'm just trying to survive without becoming bitter." "You're succeeding." They drove back to the estate in comfortable silence, Emily's head full of everything they had shared. She felt lighter somehow, like she had been carrying a weight she hadn't realized was there. "Thank you," she said as Malcolm walked her to the staff entrance, "for tonight, for seeing me." "Thank you for letting me," Malcolm hesitated. "Emily, I'd like to see you again. Tomorrow, if possible." Emily's heart raced. "Your family will have to accept that I make my own choices about who I spend time with." Malcolm's voice was gentle but firm. "If you want to see me too, that's all that matters." Emily thought about Helen Wright's expectations, about Nina Brooks and business contracts and the vast difference between their worlds. Then she looked at Malcolm's face in the moonlight, at the hope and sincerity in his dark eyes. "I want to see you too," she whispered. Malcolm smiled and leaned down to brush a soft kiss across her cheek. "Sweet dreams, Emily." She watched him drive away before slipping quietly into the house. As she prepared for bed, Emily caught her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. She looked the same as always, but something in her eyes was different, brighter, maybe, more alive. For the first time in 3 years, Emily fell asleep thinking about tomorrow instead of just getting through today. And somewhere in the main house, Malcolm Wright was doing the same thing. The morning brought rain, but Emily woke with unusual energy despite the gray skies. She moved through her early duties with a lightness in her step that didn't go unnoticed by the other staff members. "Someone's cheerful today," commented Sarah, one of the younger maids, as they worked together in the main hallway. Emily just smiled and continued polishing the banister. She couldn't explain the feeling bubbling up inside her chest, part excitement, part terror, all hope. "Emily," Mrs. Alvarez appeared at the top of the stairs. "Mrs. Wright wants to see you in her sitting room." Emily's cheerful mood evaporated instantly. Helen Wright had never summoned her for a private conversation before. "Did she say what about?" "No, dear, but don't look so worried. You haven't done anything wrong." Emily made her way to the elegant sitting room, where Helen Wright conducted her morning correspondence. The older woman looked up from her writing desk, her expression unreadable. "Emily, please sit down." Emily perched on the edge of an antique chair, her hands folded carefully in her lap. "Yes, ma'am?" "I understand you went out last evening." Emily's blood turned to ice. Someone had seen her leave with Malcolm, or seen them return. "Yes, ma'am, after my duties were finished." "Of course. You're entitled to your free time." Helen's tone was conversational, but Emily heard the steel underneath. "I simply wanted to remind you that this household runs on discretion. We all have our roles to play, and it's important that we play them well." "I understand, ma'am." "Do you?" Helen leaned back in her chair, studying Emily with sharp eyes. "You're a lovely girl, Emily. Hard-working, reliable. It would be unfortunate if you were to misinterpret kindness for something more significant." Emily felt heat flood her cheeks. The message was clear, even delivered in Helen Wright's refined tones. "Know your place. Don't reach above your station. Don't mistake politeness for genuine interest." "I would never presume." "I'm sure you wouldn't, intentionally." Helen's smile was cool. "But sometimes young people can be optimistic about situations that are inherently temporary." The word hit Emily like a physical blow. Temporary. Whatever Helen Wright knew or suspected about her son's attention, she wanted Emily to understand that it wouldn't last. "I understand completely, ma'am. I knew you would. You're a sensible girl." Helen turned back to her correspondence, dismissing Emily with practiced efficiency. "That will be all." Emily stood on shaking legs and made her way back to the hallway. She leaned against the wall for a moment, fighting tears of humiliation and disappointment. She'd been foolish to think that one evening of conversation could mean anything real. Helen Wright was right. She was just the help, and help was always temporary. "Emily," Malcolm's voice made her look up sharply. He stood at the end of the hallway, concern written across his features. "Are you all right? You look upset." "I'm fine." Emily straightened, pulling her professional composure back into place. "Just tired." Malcolm stepped closer, his eyes searching her face. "What happened?" Emily shook her head. "Nothing happened. I need to get back to work." "Emily, talk to me, please." "I can't." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I have duties to attend to, Mr. Wright." Malcolm flinched at the formal address. "Mr. Wright? Emily, what's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. I think we should both remember what's appropriate." Emily turned away. unable to look at the hurt in his eyes. "Excuse me." She hurried toward the kitchen, leaving Malcolm standing alone in the hallway. Behind her, she heard him call her name, but she didn't turn around. Helen Wright's words echoed in her mind. Temporary, temporary, temporary. Emily threw herself into her work for the rest of the morning, scrubbing floors that were already clean and organizing supplies that were already perfectly arranged. Anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from replaying Malcolm's confused expression. "Child, you're going to wear a hole in that floor," Mrs. Alvarez observed, finding Emily on her hands and knees in the kitchen pantry. It needed attention. "What it needs and what you're giving it are two different things." Mrs. Alvarez sat down on a nearby stool, her kind eyes patient. "Want to talk about it?" Emily sat back on her heels, wiping sweat from her forehead. "Mrs. Wright spoke with me this morning." "Ah," Mrs. Alvarez nodded knowingly. "What did she say?" "That I should be careful not to misinterpret kindness." Emily's voice was small. "That some things are inherently temporary." Mrs. Alvarez was quiet for a long moment. "Emily, I've worked for this family for 15 years. I've seen them be genuinely kind, and I've seen them be strategically polite. There's a difference." "What do you mean?" "I mean that Mrs. Wright doesn't waste time warning people away from things that don't matter." Mrs. Alvarez leaned forward. "If she felt the need to have that conversation with you, it's because she sees something that concerns her." Emily stared at the older woman. "You think she's worried about Malcolm's interest in me?" "I think she's a mother who's used to controlling her family's image, and I think you're a threat to that control, whether you mean to be or not." "I'm not a threat to anyone. I'm just a beautiful, intelligent, genuine young woman who caught her son's attention." Mrs. Alvarez smiled sadly. "In Helen Wright's world, that makes you very dangerous indeed." Emily felt fresh tears threaten. "It doesn't matter. She's right. I'm just the help. Whatever I thought I saw in Malcolm's attention, it was just me being foolish." "Was it?" Mrs. Alvarez stood up, brushing dust from her apron. "Because the young man I saw asking about your schedule yesterday didn't look like someone just being polite to the help." Emily's heart jumped. "He asked about my schedule? Wanted to know when you had free time, when you might be available for a walk or conversation." Mrs. Alvarez paused at the pantry door. "Emily, I can't tell you what to do, but I can tell you this. Helen Wright wouldn't be worried if her son wasn't serious." Emily spent the rest of the day in turmoil. Part of her wanted to believe Mrs. Alvarez, wanted to trust that Malcolm's interest was genuine. But Helen Wright's words kept echoing in her mind, reminding her of all the reasons why reaching above her station was foolish and dangerous. When evening came and dinner service began, Emily made sure to stay in the background, avoiding eye contact with Malcolm across the dining room. But she could feel his gaze on her, could sense his confusion and concern. Every instinct told her to look at him, to somehow signal that her coldness wasn't about him. But Helen Wright's warning held her back. After dinner, as the family gathered in the library, Emily escaped to the gardens for a few minutes of peace. The rain had stopped, leaving the air fresh and clean. She sat on a stone bench near the rose garden, trying to sort through her tangled emotions. "I thought I might find you here." Emily's heart jumped as Malcolm's voice came from behind her. She started to stand, but he held up a hand. "Please don't run away again. I just want to understand what changed between last night and this morning." Emily remained seated, but didn't look at him as he settled on the bench beside her. "Nothing changed. Everything changed. Last night you were present, real. Today you're hiding behind that professional mask again." Malcolm's voice was gentle but persistent. "Did I do something wrong? Say something that upset you?" "No." Emily's voice was barely a whisper. "You didn't do anything wrong." "Then what?" Emily finally looked at him, seeing the genuine concern in his dark eyes. "Your mother spoke with me this morning." Malcolm's expression hardened. "What did she say?" "That I should be careful not to misinterpret kindness, that some situations are inherently temporary." Emily's voice grew stronger as she continued. "She was right, Malcolm. I was reading too much into your attention." "Were you?" The simple question hung in the air between them. Emily met his gaze, searching for signs of polite dismissal or uncomfortable retreat. Instead, she saw something that made her breath catch. "I don't know," she whispered. I do. Malcolm turned to face her fully. Emily, I need you to understand something. My mother is used to managing my social life like a business transaction. She sees relationships as strategic alliances, connections that serve the family's interests. Maybe that's not wrong. It is wrong, at least for me. Malcolm's voice was firm. I'm 30 years old. I've been in relationships that looked perfect on paper and felt empty inside. I've attended dinner parties where I was introduced to suitable women who saw me as a prize to be won. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. I'm not suitable, Malcolm. Your mother made that very clear. According to whose definition? Malcolm reached for her hand, and after a moment's hesitation, she let him take it. Emily, you're kind, intelligent, hard-working, and genuine. You make me laugh. You challenge me to think differently. When I'm with you, I feel like myself instead of like a character I'm supposed to play. But your family? My family will adjust. They care about my happiness, even if they sometimes forget that happiness isn't the same as social approval. Emily wanted to believe him, but Helen Wright's warning still echoed in her mind. What if they don't adjust? What if choosing me costs you your relationship with them? Malcolm was quiet for a moment, considering her question seriously. Then that would be their choice, not mine. Emily, I can't live my life based on other people's limitations, and I won't ask you to make yourself smaller to fit into their expectations. Emily stared at their joined hands, Malcolm's larger and darker than hers, but somehow they fit perfectly together. This is crazy. We barely know each other. Then let's get to know each other, really know each other. Malcolm squeezed her hand gently. Give us a chance to see what this could become. Emily looked up at him, seeing hope and determination in his expression. It won't be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Emily thought about her parents, who had built their love from respect and shared dreams. She thought about the way Malcolm looked at her like she was someone worth knowing, worth fighting for. She thought about Helen Wright's warning and the vast difference between their worlds. Then she thought about Mrs. Alvarez's words. Helen Wright wouldn't be worried if her son wasn't serious. Okay, Emily said softly. Malcolm's face lit up. Okay? Okay, let's see what this could become. Malcolm smiled and lifted their joined hands to brush a kiss across her knuckles. Thank you for being brave enough to try. As they walked back toward the house together, Emily felt that same sense of possibility she'd experienced the night before. Helen Wright might be right that their situation was complicated, even dangerous. But for the first time in years, Emily decided that the risk might be worth taking. Some things were worth fighting for, even when the odds seemed impossible. Maybe especially then. The next few days passed in a careful dance of stolen moments and cautious glances. Emily threw herself into her work with renewed focus, determined to be beyond reproach in her duties. But now there was an undercurrent of anticipation that made even the most mundane tasks feel different. Malcolm found ways to cross her path naturally, asking for fresh coffee in his study when she was dusting nearby, taking walks in the garden when she was arranging flowers on the terrace. Their conversations were brief but meaningful, layers of understanding building between them. The roses are beautiful this time of year, he said one afternoon, finding her cutting stems for the dining room arrangement. They're at their peak, Emily agreed, her hands steady on the shears despite her racing heart. Mrs. Wright prefers them just before they fully open. And what do you prefer? Emily paused, considering the question seriously. I like them at every stage. The tight buds full of promise, the full blooms showing all their beauty, even the petals falling. There's grace in every phase. Malcolm smiled. You see poetry in everything. I see truth in everything. Beauty isn't just about perfection. Their eyes met over the roses, and Emily felt that familiar flutter in her chest. Malcolm reached out as if to touch her hand, then pulled back as voices drifted from the terrace. Malcolm, darling, there you are. Helen Wright appeared in the garden doorway, her smile perfectly composed. Daniel's looking for you. Something about the Peterson contracts. Of course. Malcolm's tone was respectful but cool. Emily, thank you for the garden tour. The grounds look exceptional. Emily nodded, understanding the performance. Thank you, Mr. Malcolm. As Malcolm walked away with his mother, Emily heard Helen's voice drift back. She's quite dedicated to her work. Mrs. Alvarez speaks very highly of her. The words sounded like praise, but Emily caught the underlying message. Good help is hard to find. Don't do anything to upset the balance. That evening, Emily was surprised to find a small note slipped under her door. Meet me in the library at 10 p.m. The family will be in the media room, watching a film. M. Emily stared at the note, her heart pounding. Meeting him in the main house in the family's private spaces felt like crossing a line, but she also couldn't ignore the pull she felt toward him, the growing certainty that what they were building together mattered. At 10 o'clock, she slipped quietly through the staff corridors to the library. The room was dimly lit by table lamps, creating pools of warm light among the towering bookshelves. Malcolm was waiting near the fireplace, but he wasn't alone. Emily. Nina Brooks turned from where she had been examining a leather-bound volume, her smile perfectly polite. How nice to see you. Emily's stomach dropped. Nina was even more beautiful than Emily remembered. Tall, elegant, with the kind of effortless sophistication that came from a lifetime of privilege. Her dark hair was styled in a perfect updo, and her designer dress probably cost more than Emily made in 6 months. Miss Brooks, Emily managed, I didn't realize I can come back later. Actually, I was just leaving. Nina set the book back on its shelf with careful precision. Malcolm and I were reminiscing about old times. Amazing how much history two people can share. The words were casual, but Emily heard the claim being staked. Nina moved toward the door, pausing beside Emily with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. You know, Emily, I admire your dedication to your work here. The Wright family is fortunate to have such attentive staff. The pause before attentive made Emily's cheeks burn. Nina's message was as clear as Helen Wright's had been. Know your place. After Nina left, Emily and Malcolm stood in awkward silence. The warm intimacy Emily had hoped for felt impossibly far away. I'm sorry about that, Malcolm said finally. I didn't know she was coming by. It's fine. Emily's voice sounded smaller than she intended. She's right. You two have a lot of history. We have a past, Malcolm corrected firmly. That's different from having a future. Emily wanted to believe him, but Nina's confident presence lingered in the room like expensive perfume. She's beautiful, sophisticated, everything your family would want for you. She's also calculating and status-conscious and more interested in my bank account than my thoughts. Malcolm stepped closer to Emily. She's everything I'm trying to get away from. But she fits, Malcolm. In your world, with your family. She fits in ways I never could. Malcolm was quiet for a moment, and Emily felt her heart sink. Maybe he was finally seeing the impossibility of what they were attempting. Come here, he said softly, holding out his hand. Emily hesitated, then placed her hand in his. He led her to the window that looked out over the estate grounds, now silver in the moonlight. Do you see that oak tree by the pond? Malcolm pointed to a massive tree that stood alone in the distance. My grandfather planted that when he was my age. Everyone told him it was the wrong spot. Too far from the house, too close to the water. They said it would never thrive there. Emily followed his gaze to the tree, which stood tall and proud against the night sky. But he planted it anyway, because he believed it belonged there. And now it's the most beautiful tree on the property. Malcolm turned to face her. Sometimes the most worthwhile things don't fit where everyone expects them to. Emily felt tears prick at her eyes. Malcolm, I know this is complicated. I know there are obstacles. But Emily, what we're building together, it's real. It's worth fighting for. Emily looked into his eyes, seeing sincerity and determination there. But she also saw the magnitude of what he was asking, from both of them. What if we're wrong? What if we're both just caught up in the idea of something different, something forbidden? Then we'll figure that out together, Malcolm said simply. But Emily, I've never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. That has to count for something. Emily's breath caught. It was the closest either of them had come to speaking the word that hovered between them, too powerful and too frightening to say aloud. I feel it too, she whispered. That's what scares me. Malcolm smiled and lifted his hand to cup her cheek gently. Maybe it's supposed to be scary. Maybe that's how you know it matters. He leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away. Instead, Emily rose on her tiptoes to meet him halfway. Their first kiss was soft and tentative, a question and an answer all at once. When they broke apart, Emily felt like the world had shifted on its axis. "This changes everything," she breathed. "I hope so," Malcolm said, his forehead resting against hers. They talked until nearly midnight, sharing fears and dreams and quiet laughter. When Emily finally returned to her room, her mind was spinning with the magnitude of what was happening between them. She was falling in love with Malcolm Wright, and despite every rational objection, she was beginning to believe he was falling in love with her too. But love, she was learning, was only the beginning of the challenge. The next morning brought an unexpected disruption to the estate's usual routine. Emily was arranging flowers in the front hallway when she heard raised voices from the direction of Richard Wright's study. Through the partially open door, she could see Malcolm facing his father across the large mahogany desk. "The Peterson deal is too important to risk over personal complications," Richard was saying, his voice tight with controlled frustration. "There are no complications, Dad. There are choices, and I'm making mine. Choices have consequences, Malcolm, for you and for this family." Emily forced herself to keep working, but every word felt like a blade. She understood now that Malcolm's interest in her wasn't just about them. It was about him asserting his independence from family expectations. "Mr. Wright wants to see you in his study." Mrs. Alvarez appeared beside her, speaking quietly. Emily's blood turned to ice. "Which Mr. Wright?" "Richard. And Emily." Mrs. Alvarez's voice was gentle but concerned. "Be careful what you say." Emily made her way to the study on unsteady legs. Malcolm was gone, leaving her to face his father alone. Richard Wright looked up from his papers, his expression unreadable. "Emily, please sit down." She perched on the edge of the chair across from his desk, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "You've been with us 8 months now," Richard began conversationally. "Mrs. Alvarez speaks very highly of your work." "Thank you, sir. She also mentioned that you were considering furthering your education. Business management, I believe?" Emily blinked in surprise. She had mentioned her college dreams to Mrs. Alvarez months ago, never thinking the information would travel higher. "It's just an idea, sir. It wouldn't interfere with my duties here." "Actually, I think it's an excellent idea." Richard leaned back in his chair. "In fact, I'd like to make you an offer. There's a community college about an hour from here that has an excellent business program. I would be happy to provide financial assistance, full tuition, plus a generous bonus to help with expenses." Emily stared at him, confused. "Sir? The only requirement would be that you start immediately, full-time enrollment, which would of course mean you'd need to resign your position here." Understanding hit Emily like a physical blow. Richard Wright was offering her everything she had dreamed of, and requiring her to leave Malcolm to get it. "That's very generous, sir, but think about it carefully, Emily." Richard's voice remained calm, but steel had entered his tone. "This is the opportunity you've been working toward, a chance to build the life you want, to become the person you're meant to be. It would be unfortunate to let personal attachments cloud your judgment about such an important decision." Personal attachments. The phrase hung in the air like a threat. "I understand, sir." "I hope you do." Richard returned to his papers, dismissing her. "I'll need an answer by tomorrow evening." Emily left the study feeling like she was walking through a dream. Richard Wright was offering her freedom, independence, everything she had worked toward. All she had to do was walk away from Malcolm. She spent the day in a daze, mechanically completing her tasks while her mind raced. By evening, she felt no closer to an answer. The rational part of her knew she should take Richard's offer. It was her chance to escape the limitations of service, to build something of her own. But the thought of leaving Malcolm, of never seeing his smile or hearing his laugh again, made her chest ache with an almost physical pain. "You're very quiet tonight," Malcolm observed when he found her in the garden after dinner. "Everything all right?" Emily looked at him in the moonlight, memorizing every detail of his face. "Your father spoke with me today." Malcolm's expression grew serious. "What did he say?" Emily told him about the college offer, watching his face grow darker with each word. He's trying to buy you off, Malcolm said when she finished, offering you a bribe to disappear from my life. It's not a bribe, Emily said quietly. It's an opportunity, everything I've been working toward, at the cost of us. Malcolm, maybe he's right. Maybe I should take the chance to build something of my own instead of depending on someone else's feelings. Malcolm was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was careful, controlled. Is that what you think you're doing, depending on my feelings? I don't know what I'm doing anymore. Emily's voice broke slightly. I've never been in a situation like this. I don't know how to separate what I want from what I should want. What do you want, Emily? Not what's practical or safe or expected. What do you actually want? Emily looked into his eyes, seeing love and pain and determination there. I want to be with you. But I also want to be someone in my own right, not just the woman who caught Malcolm Wright's attention. You're already someone, Malcolm said fiercely. You were someone long before you met me. Taking my father's offer doesn't make you more valuable. It just makes you more convenient for him. But it's still my dream, Malcolm. The education, the independence. I can't pretend that doesn't matter. Malcolm nodded slowly. You're right. It does matter. And you shouldn't have to choose between your dreams and your heart. Then what do we do? Malcolm was quiet for a moment, then took her hands in his. We refuse to play by their rules. Emily, what if you could have both? What if you could go to school and we could still be together? How? I'll drive you to classes. We'll make the distance work. And when you graduate, if you want to start that catering business, I'll help you get it off the ground. Malcolm's voice grew more confident as he spoke. Emily, I don't want to be something that holds you back from your dreams. I want to be someone who helps you achieve them. Emily felt tears spill over. You would do that? I would do anything for you, Malcolm said simply. The question is whether you trust me enough to try. Emily looked at him through her tears, seeing not just love but partnership in his expression. The offer wasn't about dependence. It was about building something together. Yes, she whispered. I trust you. Malcolm smiled and pulled her into his arms, holding her close as she cried against his shoulder. They stood together in the garden, two people choosing love over fear, partnership over safety. But even as Emily felt hope bloom in her chest, she knew the real battle was just beginning. Richard Wright had made his position clear, and she doubted. He would accept their refusal to play by his rules quietly. Love might be worth fighting for, but Emily was about to learn just how high the cost of that fight could be. The next morning arrived gray and overcast, matching Emily's mood as she prepared for what she knew would be a difficult day. She had barely slept, her mind churning with everything Malcolm had said, everything his father had offered, and the impossible choice that lay before her. She moved through her morning duties mechanically, polishing surfaces that already gleamed and arranging flowers that didn't need arranging. Mrs. Alvarez watched her with knowing eyes but said nothing, understanding that some battles had to be fought alone. At exactly 10 o'clock, Emily knocked on Richard Wright's study door. Come in. His voice was calm, expectant. Emily entered to find Richard behind his desk, reviewing papers with the same focused attention he brought to all his business dealings. He looked up as she approached, his expression neutral but alert. Emily, I trust you've had time to consider my offer? Yes, sir, and I'm very grateful for your generosity. Richard nodded, clearly expecting acceptance. Excellent. I can have the paperwork ready but I can't accept it. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Richard's pen stopped moving across the paper, his dark eyes, so like Malcolm's but somehow colder, focusing on Emily with sharp intensity. I see. His voice remained level. May I ask why? Emily had rehearsed this moment, but now, facing Richard Wright's controlled power, the words felt fragile in her mouth. Because it would mean leaving people I care about, and I'm not ready to do that. People you care about. Richard set down his pen with deliberate precision. Emily, you're a bright young woman. Surely you understand that some situations are temporary by nature. There was that word again. Temporary. Everyone seemed determined to remind her that her place in Malcolm's life had an expiration date. Maybe, Emily said quietly. But maybe not. I'd like the chance to find out. Richard leaned back in his chair, studying her with the same attention he might give a business competitor. You realize what you're turning down? This isn't just about college tuition. This is about your entire future. I understand that, sir. Do you? Because from where I sit, it looks like you're choosing to remain dependent on the goodwill of others rather than building something of your own. The words stung because they echoed Emily's own fears. It's not what I'm doing. Isn't it? Richard's voice grew sharper. Emily, my son is going through a phase. He's always been drawn to projects. People he thinks need rescuing. It's admirable in some ways, but it's not a foundation for lasting relationship. Emily felt heat flood her cheeks. You think I'm a project? I think you're a lovely young woman who's found herself in a situation she doesn't fully understand. Richard's tone softened slightly, but the steel remained underneath. Malcolm will tire of playing house with the help, and when he does, where will that leave you? Emily wanted to argue, to defend what she and Malcolm had built together, but doubt crept in like cold water. What if Richard was right? What if Malcolm's interest in her was just rebellion against his family's expectations? I appreciate your concern, sir, but I've made my decision. Richard was quiet for a long moment, then reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a thick envelope. Very well. But Emily, let me give you some advice from someone who's navigated these waters longer than you've been alive. He slid the envelope across the desk. When you're ready to reconsider, and you will be, this offer will still be available, but opportunities like this don't come around often. Emily stared at the envelope without touching it. What is it? Everything you need to start school next semester, application materials, financial aid forms, even a letter of recommendation from me. Richard's smile was thin. Insurance, you might say. Emily stood, her legs unsteady. I should get back to work. Of course. But Emily, Richard's voice stopped her at the door. Think carefully about what you're really fighting for. Sometimes what we mistake for love is just the excitement of crossing boundaries we shouldn't cross. Emily fled the study, Richard's words echoing in her mind. She made it to the staff bathroom before the tears started, locking the door and sinking onto the small chair in the corner. Was she making a terrible mistake? Richard Wright was a successful businessman, someone who understood the world in ways she never could. If he said Malcolm's interest was temporary, maybe she should listen. But then she remembered Malcolm's hands holding hers in the garden, the way he looked at her like she was precious and real and worth fighting for. She remembered their conversations about dreams and fears, the way he made her laugh, the way he seemed to see straight to her heart. A soft knock on the door interrupted her spiraling thoughts. Emily? It's Mrs. Alvarez. Are you all right, dear? Emily wiped her eyes and opened the door. Mrs. Alvarez took one look at her face and ushered her into the supply closet, closing the door behind them. He offered you the money again, didn't he? Emily nodded, not trusting her voice. And you turned it down. Yes. But Mrs. Alvarez, what if he's right? What if I'm just fooling myself about Malcolm's feelings? Mrs. Alvarez was quiet for a moment, then reached out to smooth Emily's hair back from her face with motherly tenderness. Emily, I've worked for wealthy families for 25 years. I've seen young men go through phases, chase after inappropriate women to rebel against their parents, use people for entertainment. Emily's heart sank. I've also seen real love. It's rarer than you'd think in these circles, but when it happens, it's unmistakable. Mrs. Alvarez cupped Emily's face gently. What I see when Malcolm looks at you isn't rebellion or entertainment, it's recognition. Recognition. He sees something in you that he's been looking for, something real and honest and good. Mrs. Alvarez smiled sadly. The question isn't whether his feelings are genuine. The question is whether you're brave enough to trust them. Emily felt fresh tears spill over. I'm scared. Of course you are. Love is terrifying, especially when it asks you to believe in something that seems impossible. Mrs. Alvarez pulled Emily into a warm hug. But honey, some things are worth being scared for. Emily clung to the older woman, drawing strength from her certainty. When she finally pulled away, she felt steadier, more resolved. What do I do now? You live your life. You do your work. You let Malcolm show you through his actions what his words mean. Mrs. Alvarez smiled. and you stop letting other people's fears become your own. Emily spent the rest of the day following Mrs. Alvarez's advice, focusing on her duties with renewed purpose. But she couldn't shake the feeling that Richard's conversation with her was only the beginning. Men like Richard Wright didn't accept defeat easily. That evening, as she was finishing up in the dining room, she heard voices from the library. Malcolm's voice, raised in anger, and his father's calmer tones. She tried not to listen, but the words carried clearly through the open door. "This has gone far enough, Malcolm. I disagree. I think it's just getting started. You're making a mistake that will affect more than just your personal life. The Peterson deal. Forget the Peterson deal. If they can't work with me because of who I choose to love, then we don't need their business." Emily's breath caught. Who I choose to love. Malcolm had said it clearly, definitively to his father. "Love?" Richard's voice was sharp. "Malcolm, be realistic. You barely know this girl. I know enough. I know she's kind and genuine and makes me want to be a better man. I know she sees me for who I am, not what I can provide. I know that when I imagine my future, she's in it." Emily pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Malcolm was fighting for her, putting everything on the line for what they had together. And what about her future? Have you considered that? You're asking her to tie herself to someone whose family will never fully accept her, whose social circle will always see her as an outsider. Is that fair to her? Emily heard Malcolm's footsteps pacing across the library floor. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, but no less determined. "You're right that she deserves better. She deserves a family that welcomes her, a community that sees her worth. If our family and our social circle can't provide that, then maybe we need a different family and a different social circle." The silence that followed was deafening. Emily could imagine Richard Wright processing his son's words, understanding that Malcolm was prepared to walk away from everything if necessary. "You would really do that? Give up everything you've been raised to, everything you've worked toward for a woman you met 3 weeks ago? For the right woman?" "Yes," without hesitation. Emily heard chairs scraping, footsteps, the sound of the library door closing firmly. A moment later, Malcolm appeared in the dining room doorway, his face flushed with emotion and determination. "Emily," he stopped when he saw her tears. "You heard." "I heard." Emily wiped her eyes, her heart full to bursting. "Malcolm, you can't throw away your relationship with your family for me." "I'm not throwing anything away. I'm making a choice about what matters most." Malcolm crossed the room and pulled her into his arms. "Emily, I meant every word I said in there. When I think about my future, you're in it. Not as a temporary distraction or a rebellion against my parents, but as my partner, my equal, the woman I want to build a life with." Emily looked up at him, seeing absolute certainty in his dark eyes. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." Malcolm cupped her face in his hands. "The question is, are you sure? Because this won't be easy. My family's going to fight this. Some of our friends won't understand. There will be people who will always see you as someone who doesn't belong in my world." Emily thought about Richard's warnings, about Nina's subtle threats, about Helen's careful suggestions that she know her place. Then she thought about Malcolm's hands in hers, his laughter in the garden, the way he made her feel like she was exactly where she belonged. "Then maybe we need to build our own world," she said softly. Malcolm's face lit up with a smile that transformed his entire expression. "Is that a yes?" "That's a yes to whatever comes next. Together." Malcolm kissed her then, deep and sure and full of promise. When they broke apart, Emily felt like everything had changed. They weren't just two people attracted to each other anymore. They were partners choosing to face whatever came next together. "So what do we do now?" Emily asked. "Now we stop hiding. Tomorrow night, the family is hosting a dinner party for some potential business partners. I want you there, not as staff, but as my guest." Emily's eyes widened. "Malcolm, that's me publicly claiming what we have together, letting everyone know that you're not going anywhere." Malcolm's voice was firm. "Unless you're not ready for that." Emily thought about the magnitude of what he was suggesting, walking into a room full of wealthy, powerful people as Malcolm Wright's equal rather than their servant. Facing Helen's displeasure and Richard's anger head on. It was terrifying. It was probably foolish. It might be the biggest mistake of her life. But it was also her chance to step into the life she wanted instead of the life others expected her to accept. "I'm ready," she said. Malcolm smiled and kissed her forehead gently. "Then let's show them what real love looks like." As Emily prepared for bed that night, she caught her reflection in the small mirror above her dresser. She looked the same as always, but something fundamental had shifted. She wasn't just Emily Carter, the quiet maid who tried to stay invisible anymore. She was Emily Carter, the woman Malcolm Wright loved. The woman brave enough to fight for what mattered, even when the odds seemed impossible. Tomorrow night would test everything they'd built together. But for the first time since this all began, Emily felt ready for the challenge. Love was worth fighting for, and she was finally ready to fight.